Well, I'm out of the shower. Nice to see that you're awake. You feel like going out and greeting the day with me today, Ja? I can wait for you to get done licking your hand for you to respond. Well, good morning, Lionhearts. It's your old pal, Jordan the Lion. How are you all doing today? Excellent. I hope you said great. I am feeling great today. And today what I want to go do is I want to go over to Hollywood. We're actually going to go to Santa Monica Boulevard and we're going to go see a place that Elvis Presley made a lot of history at. Count Basie, even Sugar Ray has some history there. Yeah. So Daze with Jordan the Lion, this is going to be a good one, begins now. And today's special Patreon sunglass vlog is for Becky Bradley. Becky, I hope you enjoy our day. Now let's roll. Hello, Los Angeles. Alright, but first thing we have to do today is take Ja to the park because otherwise we're going to have a very angry co-host on our hands and we don't want that. He's a happy boy today. Some fun dogs out here today. So where we're going to go to today for the vlog is we're going to go to an old recording studio. It was actually in its day known as the greatest studio in Los Angeles, actually the greatest studio on the West Coast. It's called Radio Recorders, and even Elvis Presley came in 1956 to record Love Me Tender, loved the studio, and eventually came back and recorded quite a bit more. And there's some really great stories that go along with this place, and I'll tell you about what happened to it now. Off into the world he goes. It's not the greatest park in the world, but he really likes it here. He likes the dogs here. There's never, in all the dog parks that we've ever went to, not one altercation with an aggressive dog or anything here, so we come back. So the studio itself actually started in 1929 by the Victor Talking Machine Company, and eventually RCA ended up buying it and it became RCA Victor, but the whole purpose originally for this starting up and really get going was the talk or the announcement of talking pictures in movies. They started this studio up to get in on that. Overdubbing, and then eventually radio shows and everything would be broadcast from their large studio there. Now Jimmy Rogers recorded there with Louis Armstrong, and there's a great history to this studio, but it wasn't until 1949 that it became Radio Recorders. And Radio Recorders eventually became the largest independent recording studio in Hollywood. And that was mainly because a lot of the studios had originally been based out of New York or Chicago and hadn't created studios out here on the West Coast yet, so they were all recording there. So when he gets done over here, we'll head over to Santa Monica Boulevard and we'll go check it out. Alright, let's head up to Radio Recorders. The old Pacific streetcar used to travel along this street, and they had to build something at the studio to account for that. Talk about over here. Now this place was not part of the studio, but it is rather fitting, isn't it? You also get to pass by LaChapelle's studio, David LaChapelle, if you know his photography, his art. This place is kind of cool. They actually sell some merch and stuff in there. So you can see right here. This is not a LaChapelle, it's a sheep knockoff. But the studio that we're looking for is actually right across the street. Just wanted to show you this on the way. So there's a cool Muhammad Ali mural right here. Oh, hi Elizabeth Taylor. And Basquiat and Warhol. Wow. I love it. And the studio is this building right here. Well, in 1956, Elvis Presley came here and made his first recording here, Love Me Tender, and then made his last recording for the King Creole soundtrack before he joined the military. And then he ended up coming back out of the military and recording here again up until 1966. They had A, B, C, D, E, and F studios here. They all had a different purpose. I believe A was only for speaking recording. There was no music ever recorded, but B studio was the main one. That was where they recorded the big orchestras. They did Elvis's recordings. All the main recordings would have been done there. And then eventually through time, because Elvis had recorded there, they ended up renaming that studio to Studio E. Now unfortunately this ceased to be a recording studio in 2008, even though it's still a historic landmark, so the buildings are still here. You can see here it says the studio was built by RCA Victor in 1928 and has recorded Elvis Presley, Stevie Wonder, the Beach Boys, Nat King Cole, and Bing Crosby. Now one of the assistant engineers here was Jim Malloy. And Jim Malloy sat in on some of the Elvis sessions and some of the earliest sessions from when Louis Armstrong and people like that were recording here, and he said that what I remember about those days most were the technical innovations. We made the first stereo album in the United States. Louis Armstrong plays King Oliver in 1957. In 58 we had the first 2-track and 3-track Ampex tape machines, and he said that Warren Daze and I made the first stereo 8-track cassettes by hand at radio recorders. And then Warren said, what I recall most was, he said, one day bring my wife, and she said, who's that guy over there playing the piano and singing to himself? I looked over and told her, oh, that's Elvis Presley. So I mentioned that the Pacific streetcar that used to run along Santa Monica Boulevard here played a little part in how they designed this, because their Studio C, they had 6 lathes, and they could actually record straight to the lathe anything that was going on in there, like straight to lacquer. And they said since the streetcar went through here, they had to mount that like a shock mount inside sand, so that whenever the streetcar went by, it didn't disturb the lathe or ruin the recording. Now one of the things that radio recorders was known for in the 40s, before Elvis ever came here, was they used to record a lot of commercials, jingles, and like I said, a lot of radio shows, because they said they had telephone lines that ran to all the important stations and networks across the country, and Studio C was the nerve center of that. That's where they would have all of that ran through, and they would do the recordings and send everything out. But then it was also known for, like I said, with RCA Victor having been here, it was known for people like Billie Holiday and Charlie Parker and Jimmy Rogers. Really great history. And then eventually Elvis Presley, Jimi Hendrix, Frank Zappa. And then in the 60s, they ended up having to change things up a little bit. So even though Elvis Presley loved to record here, and like I mentioned, he had recorded here in 1956, and then all the way up till he went into the service for his last recording being King Creole, but he came back in 1960 to do GI Blues. But in 1966, he was recording one of his new movie soundtracks, and MGM decided to move it over to their own facility, and a lot of the other studios kind of saw this and decided to do the same, and that was the start of the decline of those days of this wonderful studio. So in addition to this building, they had another warehouse around the corner all the way back to the RCA Victor days, and it was called the Annex. So let's go over and take a look at the Annex now. And whatever the heck's going on here, we're passing by right within those walls. All those great recordings would have been made. So cool. So the Annex is literally just the next block over. We were on the corner of Orange and Santa Monica, and we're walking over to Sycamore. So what's now the record plant. The record plant made its name in New York City and then opened a West Coast version out here eventually. Now the record plant in New York City, the original location, isn't even there. But this was originally built when RCA Victor and everything started up, but it was just a warehouse. And then in 1946, they remodeled the warehouse and this was where they installed their famous echo chamber. And they basically turned this into what was then called the Radio Recorder's Annex, and basically this was a major place to record for large bands. Like, this was equipped for like 50 musicians. And then one of the engineers over at Radio Recorders in 1965 decided just to buy it, and he opened up his own independent studio here and called it the Annex. And Lawrence Welk Show ended up moving in and recording most of their stuff through the 60s and 70s, and that was his primary client. They said that they also made the early pressings of Barbra Streisand's The Way We Were inside this building. So at the beginning of the vlog I mentioned that even Sugar Ray recorded here, which you're thinking, wow, all the way up until the 90s and 2000s they had people recording still in that place. Yeah, because it had been bought again in the 80s and changed over to called Studio 56. Tony Braxton, No Doubt, Guns N' Roses, Sugar Ray, people like that all recorded there. And then eventually it all closed down in 2008 and the record plant took over. So now they still make great music in there, and technically the buildings, the original buildings that all those great recordings were recorded in, still exist, but now Radio Recorders that we were looking at earlier is, I believe, an art gallery. It's an empty art gallery. No longer the haven where Elvis Presley would have recorded all those wonderful movie soundtracks in Studio B. One cool thing that was filmed here, if you ever saw the Standing in the Shadows of Motown documentary, where they had the musicians and they're interviewed and playing and everything, they recorded that here. As cool as it is that all those technical innovations were made here, to me, knowing that the original crew for Elvis, the Scotty, DJ, Elvis, his original band, they were all recording those songs here together. Awesome. I'm gonna see if maybe they'll let me show the inside. So that's what it looks like now. Man, some seriously historical recordings made here. Hey, you know, never hurts to ask, and this time it worked because we got to go in and see it. Love Me Tender was recorded there. Come on. Name that movie quote. Scott Michaels, name that movie quote. This art says it all right there. Saw something interesting over here I want to show you guys. I don't know why it's here, but I totally appreciate that it is. Look at this mural. There's a mural for Up. What a great movie. So I'm pretty excited. I got mail. Anybody recognize that face? Woo! Even though I don't wear the face mask that often, they still require them around here when you go into a store. So I got one of these, like, I don't know what they're called, but they look like a turtleneck basically that is kind of elastic around your face. I'll show it off here in a second. How cool. So I guess this is kind of the basic idea for it, right? Alright my friends, we're gonna call it a day. Becky, Bradley, I hope you enjoyed that vlog. What a historical place. That was really cool just to get to walk in there and take a gander around and show you guys. I enjoyed it. I hope you did too. Gotta love Elvis history, and that's one of those things people always ask me to do, and I'm always trying to think of more Elvis vlogs, so there you go. We got another one in. Thank you Sonny Richardson, David Walden, Alan Malone, Jeff K, Yvonne McGuire, Jay Brown, and It Is Only a Dream for becoming my newest Patreons. Thank you all for watching, and we'll see you all next time. Have a great night, and goodbye.